One of the many transitions that was very jarring for people in the move from Warhammer Fantasy Battles to Age of Sigmar was the way that gods, religion, and worship fundamentally changed. In the old world, there of course were religions, even priests of Sigmar way back then, but it wasn't on this same mythic level. These were just the beliefs of some people, and other groups had other deities. But there's a huge leap from that to the kind of Norse mythology style we have in Age of Sigmar. The fact that gods walk among mortals drastically changes the dynamic of the church and faith and mortality. The new Age of Sigmar role-playing game Soulbound by Cubicle 7 gives us a little more insight into just how mortals and gods interact and the significance of their worship. One sentence that really stuck out to me is very, very simple, and it's just, there are no atheists in Age of Sigmar. The gods, once part of a pantheon, shaped the realms as we know them today. From Sigmar cultivating societies and nation-states personally, to Gorgamorka rampaging across the realms, changing the landscapes like geological features. Their existence and their works are a known factor, which makes something like faith, a belief in that which cannot be seen or proven, an odd one. In saying that there are no atheists, it's also important to really hit home that this does not mean everyone is religious. For example, the Keragen overlords famously reject the authority of any gods. In their mind, the gods absolutely exist. They understand that they exist. They're just a bunch of jerks who didn't help anyone during the early days of the Age of Chaos. Their culture evolved away from the act of worship, but not from the knowledge that gods exist. Pretty much on the other end of the spectrum is the Sylvaneth, whose every, ounce of being exists to serve and please Alariel, goddess of life. They commune with her regularly, hear her voices in their heads via the spirit song, they see her, they follow her, etc. But those are only the extremes. The vast majority of mortals across the realm fall in between those ends of the spectrum, where their worship may be nothing more than a simple prayer at night and a showing of gratitude at good fortune. In fact, while most of the factions we cover have armies really focused on one or no gods, the average human probably beseeches multiple members of the pantheon. A farmer may come from a long line of Sigmarites, praying to him daily, but come harvest time they may start praying extra to Alariel for a bountiful harvest. It's polytheism, but in a super tangible way, because we know that these gods exist and have the power to do the things that we ask of them. Alariel is real and can make your plants grow. But there's an issue. Just because the gods exist and they can spread their will across the realms does not mean that they are infinite. There are many demands made upon the gods, and they cannot possibly respond to each and every one. And that's super important to note, because the change from, faithfully requesting aid from your god to rejecting them for abandoning you can happen very fast. Now, one thing I did learn from this book that I thought was very interesting was that the gods need people who worship them to have lasting power. That is, Sigmar has more control and more influence over places where he is worshipped. And I feel like that was implied before, but it was never made like black and white print, that the gods need our worship as much as we need their aid to survive in the realms. So with that perspective, you can see the balancing game that the gods are playing with their attention. I want to have power in X place, so it's imperative that I maintain a presence and answer prayers and etc. in this location. It also makes missionaries of all kinds vitally important in spreading the power of their deity. Now, I'll admit, this does raise a few questions, like how much power did the gods have before Sigmar founded civilizations, because, we are led to believe that he predates them. Maybe there's a combination of power they get from their specific realm and having followers and devotees. It's just something that makes me curious, but honestly, I like the hardline stance that says mortal worship is in fact very important. Now, because the gods cannot be everywhere, they oftentimes select individuals to sort of act as their proxies, imbuing them with a small portion of their power to enact their will. And this is how we get priests performing miracles in the name of Sigmar, or channeling Alariel to grow a forest, or at least, speed up its growth. And there's a bit of a tension here. since these mortals aren't really asked if they want this kind of responsibility, but happy or not, they do reaffirm to everyone around them that the gods are real and listening. And not only that, but they have the power here to do what you ask. And oftentimes, to aid them, these chosen holy people will construct elaborate temples to their patron deity. And this is something I wanted to read more about, because it's stated that each temple, church, whatever, is really made to represent that particular god, instead of like one big generic church with altars to each one. So, for example, in Azir, the churches to Sigmar are these big, elaborate monoliths, right? Each one a testament to the limits of mortal craftsmanship. It's clean and structured, and his church is highly organized, and this makes sense because what Sigmar really offered people of the realms is civilization, order, knowledge. So any temple built to him would naturally reflect those ideals. In contrast, the shrines to Alariel often forego elaborate construction projects and instead focus on locations of natural beauty, her divine presence made manifest in lush forests, fertile gardens, and the like. Much like Alariel, her temples can be wild and dangerous, but they focus on a harmony with everything in nature around it. But not all of the gods like to be worshipped in these kind of off-to-the-side hallowed places. Some instead demand action. So for example, the god of the fire slayers, Grimnir, wouldn't be content with his children standing around a temple all day. Grimnir is pleased when oaths are fulfilled, battles are won, and heroism is displayed. And of course, his desperate essence in Urgold is recovered. Same goes for the daughters of Cain, right? Their worship of Cain, the god of murder, predominantly takes place on the battlefield rather than any structure. And I think it's a lot of these things combined that makes worship and the gods so interesting, but difficult to cover, right? Because combining the limits of the gods, the different ways and places that they can be worshipped, and how the gods use that worship all goes together to create a really intriguing world. Sigmar sends in some Stormcast Eternals, they establish a beachhead, civilization blossoms, and the Sigmarite church joins. And as it joins, it grows and spreads, and Sigmar has more power and influence on that area. His blessings allow the faith to spread, but things like doubt, resentment, or religious corruption are constant issues. They must be purged, ejected, or crushed. And the second that mortal element is introduced, to aid in spreading religion, things open up to corruption. There's, Zinchi cults or corrupt priests. But even more than that, there's just the practical politicking of humans all fighting for authority and stature. It gets messy, and that's why I like it, because in the messiness, there are these stories and characters. People who may have risen high in the church organization, but then come at odds with another person who Sigmar has chose to bless. It's that internal tension and drama, all while the church is growing and fighting off threats, that makes it so intriguing. And so let's talk about why is this cool, right? It's not a huge section in the book. There's some ideas in there that are super fascinating, like the idea that, the gods need us and that kind of stuff. But it's not a huge section, but I wanted to talk about it because it's something that really always interested me. What I like about it is that religion can look so differently, right? Even worship aspects of the pantheon equally. And I like that idea. I like this idea, like the example they gave in the book of the farmer who's a devout person of Sigmar, also praying to Alariel because he needs crops. I don't know why that example stuck out to me, but I'm trying to think of why other reasons that you would beseech various gods, maybe Grugni for craftsmanship and that kind of stuff, or that your steel, shield would be able to survive the crushing blow, all this kinds of stuff. Well, it's like you would just reach out to different patrons in the hope that any one of them would hear you. Setting the two extremes of, what is fundamentally agnostic, I guess, Karajan overlords, they understand that gods exist, but they're like, nah. And then at the other end of the spectrum is demigods who are imbued with their deity and see them and talk with them on a daily basis. But the idea that there's a whole range of things in between, that is polytheism, monotheism, you can have inquisitions for each of these different gods. I mean, all this stuff, it just opens up so many narrative possibilities for unique armies. It really makes me want a mortal Sigmar religious faction, right? We were talking about Devoted of Sigmar the other week, and And I want it to really focus on the importance of missionaries. Now, missionaries have quite a history in our real world, but the idea of having a faction whose mission is to spread the power and influence of their deity is cool. I don't care which faction it's a part of. It could be the Sylvaneth, it could be the Fire Slayers. I don't really care, but a faction who, like, their shtick is spreading the influence of their god. And I think that would be a really neat thing. Because now it's been mentioned, but I mean, there's no faction that specifically really does that. They all want to go on religious crusades, and they want to show that their deity is the best and the strongest and the biggest, but it's not about converting people. It's not about sanctifying lands or changing them. It's about conquering. And I want something that's more soft. I want something that's more like, we're going to influence. We're going to be just as insidious to chaos as they are to us, and we're going to change hearts and minds for a good reason. And I think that is such a cool thing. So anyway, that is my thoughts on Age of Sigmar worship. I'd love to hear what you think, and tell me what kind of ideas you've come up with in your lore to represent, like, the extreme diversity of religious beliefs in the mortal realms. I'd love to hear it. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar video. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answers here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.